everyone, my name is Keely and I'm the owner and creator here at Soy and Shea, and thank you so much for joining me for another behind the scenes video. Now last week I took you along as I made some apple embeds using a two-step process, layering up melt and pour to give it a more realistic look. And I promised that this week I was going to take it one step further to really enhance the look of those melt and pour embeds. As you would have seen at the beginning of this video, we're going to be making some citrus fruit. And in particular, I am making what I hope to look like grapefruit. Now while I'm making these grapefruit slices, I'm also going to discuss a little bit of misinformation that has been put out there about melt and pour. So let's go and see how I make my citrus fruit or grapefruit slices. So I know a lot of you have been following along for quite some time and you have seen a number of my melt and pour videos where I just simply chop up my melt and pour into the jug and I melt it down. So I have jumped straight in at the point where my melt and pour has been melted, and I've added in some lemon sherbet mica to get this real pale colour. Now as always, I am using the Stevenson's brand of melt and pour. This is the No Sweat in white. And what I'm going to do first up is I have my tray here with my little ice tray or ice cube molds. These are just a very simple sort of citrus fruit. You can make lemons, limes, we're going to make grapefruits. You could do all sorts of different citrus fruits with these ones. All I'm going to start off by doing is filling up these cavities, as many of them as I can, with my yellow. I'm then going to leave them sit here for about 15 minutes so that they firm up, but I want them to still be quite warm when I come back to them. Now these molds are a little bit winky wonky. They've been very well used, but for what we're doing here, it doesn't matter if I'm making a bit of a mess. I just want a solid yellow piece for now. Alright, so these have now been sitting for about 20 minutes. They are still warm and they are still soft, and that is very important for doing this next step. If you're going to be doing this, I really wouldn't be leaving it overnight. It does make it a lot harder. What I'm going to do is pop all of these pieces out of here, and you can see from here we've got that really nice sort of patterned edge to our citrus fruit. So we'll get this one out the way. Alright, so we've got all of our grapefruit pieces out of our mold now, and now this is where we're going to start taking it to the next step. What you need is a sharp knife, and you have to be very careful doing this, and this is why you want this to still be quite soft. What I'm now going to do is take my knife and I'm going to run it around where that rind will be, and because this is still soft, that melt and pour will just actually peel away from that inner section there, and I'm just going to come and pop that out, and that piece is going to go back into my jug. And here is the rind that's going to be on our grapefruit, and we can just give that a little bit of a tidy up where I did a bit of over pour there. Alright, so I'll come back on to the next piece here. And again, these knives, I actually picked these up in IKEA, and they are really nice and sharp. They're really easy to handle as well. I've never had to sharpen them since I've had them, and I use them for all sorts of things, and it's really good for doing this job here because it's small enough that you can actually handle them without slipping all through your melt and pour, so there's very little risk of getting cut with them. But as I said, you do need to be very, very careful doing this. Right, so while I am taking the skin off all of these pieces of fruit, some of you are probably wondering what I'm going to do with all of this scrap that I am putting in here. There has been a lot of people out there lately saying that you can only melt and pour once. I think I know where that information actually came from, because I recently discovered a video where it was kind of said. And it got me questioning, because when I first came across melt and pour, I loved the fact that if you made a mistake, you could just melt it down and you could go again. It was what everyone told you you could do. All of a sudden, I'm hearing people say that you can't remelt, melt and pour, that you can only melt it once, you pour it, and that is it. So I got a little bit curious. Now, I only ever use the Stevenson's brand of melt and pour, so I can only give you this information based off of the Stevenson's brand. It might be different for all of the other brands of melt and pour that are out there. I really don't know. But I was a little bit curious because, as I said, when I first started making melt and pour soaps, one of the sort of benefits was that if you made a mistake or if you had excess and things like that, you could remelt and reuse. So I decided to actually go directly to Stevenson's and ask the question, is it okay to remelt, melt and pour, providing you're not overheating it and not doing it excessively? And I actually did get a reply back from them. And they said there is no sort of limits to the number of times in which you can melt their bases, but to keep in mind that each time that you remelt the melt and pour, you're going to be losing moisture from out of it. So basically, if you are using melt and pour, especially that Stevenson's, you can remelt it more than once. You just don't go overboard. Don't go melting it 5, 6, 10 times, because you are going to change the integrity of the soap. But you can melt it 2 or 3 times, as long as you're doing it at a nice gentle heat and not overheating it. Now, just to show you what I mean, I have this tub of melt and pour here, and I use this one specifically. Let me get the lid off. I use this one specifically for cleaning out molds that I have actually created. This was just some spare stuff. I didn't like the color and I poured it into one of my molds one day. You can see I've done my blueberry one. It's got bits of blueberry stuck on there. So I only use this for cleaning out my own made molds. And if I grab a piece here, you can see I can actually easily break this, and that is because I have remelted this one that many times that it's lost the moisture and has become brittle. So I would never actually, apart from the fact that it has got food contamination in there, I wouldn't actually use this to make any of my projects with. But this particular melt and pour, once I've got all of these cleaned off, because this is only the first time I have melted it down, I am going to go and remelt all of these pieces that I'm cutting out of here, and I'm going to pour myself some more grapefruits, because I think I only poured about 14, I think, and I need a total of 17. And I've not fragranced these because not only will these pass as some grapefruits, I can use them as other projects such as lemons in future soaps. So now that we're down to the last one here, I am going to go and very gently melt down all of this scrap, and then I'm going to re-pour it back into these molds and do the same process again. Okay, so I have just very gently melted that down, and I am ready to start pouring some more of my little fruit shapes here. Now, quite often you'll hear me say in videos that I put my melt and pour into a bain-marie, and that is usually when I'm doing layers or working really quickly, because this one actually involves taking a bit off set soap. There's no way I could have actually kept this fluid, but in other circumstances I would keep my melt and pour in a bain-marie if I know I'm going to be using it within 10 minutes, just to make sure that we don't get any of that sort of moisture evaporation from out of the soap. So again, I have just poured myself some of these fruits. I'm going to let them sit here for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and do exactly the same and peel the skin off. Never actually melt this down more than 2, maybe 3 times, and then whatever's left over here in this sort of scrap, what I'll do now is actually melt that down and I'll pour it into this little ball mold, and I'll probably use those balls in another little project that I do. But for now, let's get to making these look a little bit more like grapefruit. Right, so I have now swapped over to the clear melt and pour, the non-sweat version. What I'm going to do is just move those bits of skin rind out of my way. I don't need my knife anymore, so we'll put that somewhere nice and safe. I've got that, just that little chunk in there, which will melt down from the heat of this jug as we do this little bit of colouring. Now normally when you look at grapefruit or lemon, they have a real light tinge of yellow colorant to them. So I'm putting in just the tiniest amount of firefly mica. And then just to give them a little bit of sparkle, I'm also going to add in some Blizzard synthetic mica as well, because it's just nice and shiny, but actually won't color the mica as such. It will still leave, or the melt and pour, it will still leave it nice and clear. So we're going to get that gently stirred in and get that piece dissolved as well. Alright, so I'm still going to work on my tray. I've got my molds back here, so the exact same molds we were using before. I am going to come out just a little bit so you can see a bit more. I get my spoon from out of my jug here, and I put like just a tiny little droplet in there, and I get one of my rinds, and then I pop it back into the container. Now the reason I put the droplet of melt and pour in there is to make sure that that holds in place. So that is when you can do a couple at a time. There's enough, as long as you're working quickly, there is enough sort of time to be able to stick your rinds into the melt and pour that you drop in. So let's get all of these pieces in. I have got all of my pieces of skin back into my mold, and I think they're all sitting in there nicely. I'm going to give them a spritz with some rubbing alcohol just to help all the melt and pour actually bind together. Now I know this does look like a little bit of work to do, but really it is well worth the effort to do this two-step process with this mold, and you get some really good looking fruit. I've done it for lemons, I've done limes, I've done the grapefruits as we do now, I've done pink grapefruits, I've done yellow grapefruits. You could do things like blood oranges if you wanted to mix, like do a layered pour so you get the red streaks through them. There's just so much you can do if you actually just do that extra little step to give the two different colours. So I'm going to fill up all of these molds here. I'm then going to leave this one to sit until it is hard, so I'll probably leave it sit here for about half an hour to 40 minutes because we're on quite a cool day today. We're sitting at about 20 degrees, which is probably quite warm to others, but it really is quite cool for Brisbane at 20 degrees. So my melt and pour is setting up nice and hard. That one had just come loose, so pop that back in. Any of the little dollops of melt and pour that I've used to actually hold that rind in will actually peel off the end fruit when we come to unmold it. So as I said, I'm going to leave this one sit here for about half an hour to 40 minutes, and then we'll come back and we will have a look at our grapefruit slices. Okay, so these have now been sitting here. They are nicely firmed up. I'm going to get them all out of their molds here. I'm going to have a lot of this sort of overpour just simply because these ice cube molds have been so well used. They're a little bit bent out of shape, but they are so easy to clean up. I'm also going to give these a bit of a tidy up once I get them all popped out of these ice trays. Alright, so these are now all out and it's time to do a little bit of a tidy up on them. So what I'll do is grab this one first. I'm going to take off that excess, just chuck it back in my jug there. Now this one's pretty good. There's no sort of, usually I'll have like a little dot of melt and pour that needs to be pulled off as well. And this one's actually pretty flat in the back, so it probably wasn't the best one to pick up and show you. But I do know that these are a little bit wider than what my soaps are going to be. So what I usually do on these as well is just trim the back of them just to make sure that they are nice and flat and nice and neat and tidy. I'll see if I can find one where it's going to make a big difference. So probably not that piece. These are have all actually poured pretty good. Here's one. Okay, so on this piece you can see that there's a lot of melt and pour missing from off of there. So all I'm going to do with my knife is just run it along the back and just trim it off and make it nice and neat. And I'm not too worried that it's made it smaller because as I said, these are usually a little bit too big for my soap anyway. So by trimming off just that little bit, I end up with a piece of fruit that's going to fit perfectly onto my piece of soap. So that is what our little grapefruit, or lemon if you want it to be, is going to look like when we do it on next soap. So I'm going to finish tidying these ones up. Just while I'm getting down to the last few of these pieces of fruit to tidy up, I just wanted to reiterate that the information that I've given today about melting down your melt and pour more than once is specific to using the Stevenson's brand of melt and pour. There are so many different brands out there on the market, and they could all have very different recommendations. They could be that you can only melt down certain brands only once. If you are using a brand other than Stevenson's Melt and Pour, then I would actually suggest either going to the supplier where you purchase that melt and pour from, or actually messaging the manufacturer directly and getting their information about what to do with their melt and pour. They'll always give you information because they want you to be able to use their products and be happy with them. Now, when you are melting down the Stevenson's Melt and Pour more than once, make sure that you are doing it very slowly and having a little bit of patience to get it melted so that you don't overheat it. If you do overheat it too much, you're not going to be able to melt it down as many times because of that water loss. And for me personally, I stick to melting it or remelting it no more than 3 times. Anything over that, then I do actually start to notice a real difference in the soap. Okay, so our fruit pieces are now all tidied up and ready to go onto the soap. I know that this does take a little bit of time to do this 2-step process, but I really love the realistic look and the depth that doing it really gives to these pieces of fruit with that yellow skin and that sort of translucent looking flesh on the inside. I hope you've enjoyed watching how I make my fruit pieces. If you did, why not leave me a thumbs up and any comments down below. If you've got any questions, I will certainly get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And until the weekend, I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you then. Bye.